Okay, this is the second video in a series of videos introducing the basics of remapping, and I'm going to start by having a look at the driver's wish map. So there's the driver's wish map, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Excel to look at changes that I might like to make. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use the built-in bits and pieces associated with Excel that allow me to make these changes. So I'm going to first of all just copy, so I'm going to put in there equals that cell, and if I press enter I get that cell. So I'm just going to copy that cell into there, and then I'm going to drag that across, and I've got to 80. I want to go one more, don't I? So I'm going to drag that across. So there is my top row. And I'm just going to highlight those so that they're in bold like they were there, and then I'm going to try the same trick downwards, and now I've got my axis data on that side. So I'm just going to, so that gives me my two sets of axes data, and then in there I'm going to put equals that value, and I'm going to say enter. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a simple change, but using Excel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up to here, that number, and I'm going to say, oh, I wonder what will happen if I add 2 to that number. So I'm going to say plus 2. And please don't assume this is something to do with being a clever remapper. I've just picked 2 out of the air for no reason. Enter. Right, now obviously it's added 2 and it's become 20.7. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to drag that down and look across, and all these numbers have now got an extra 2 on them. So 0 has become 2. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the whole column. I'm going to drag the whole column across. And now every number on here has got 2 added to it. You know, no big deal. Every number has got 2 added to it. Now I don't really want to increase the driver's wish map up at this end at all, because all I'm really interested in is seeing what will happen if I have a slight change. And so I don't really want to go massively above 70, because I already know that 70 is quite a high figure, considering that this file is being limited to 52 anyway by the talk map. So I don't really want to go above 72. So maybe I would just want to say to myself, no, I don't want those like that. So these ones that have gone above 70, well, I don't want plus 2. So I'll just go up there and I'll delete the plus 2 and click enter. And then what I'll do is I will drag that across to there, because I don't want to add plus 2, and then I'll just drag, that's not going to let me, so I'll just highlight just those 2, and I'll drag that down on any that are above 70, so that gets me to there. So they'll now read 70, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag that one down to there, so they now read 70, and then I'll look at it and I'll say to myself, well, okay, now that's my slight difference. These are 70, that one is 70, but that one's still 70. This one's gone from 67 to 69, so I've got a slight increase, and I've got a slight increase all over. Now the question is it important? Should I be worrying about a slight increase all over, or should I not be worrying about a slight increase all over? So this is where experience comes in. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just get rid of all of that, so I'm going to say clear all, and it's gone. By the way, if you're looking at this and you're thinking, I don't recognize that Excel, it's probably because you are an up-to-date person and I'm a dopey old fart, which means that I'm using a 2003 version of Excel. Every time Excel produce, or Microsoft produce a new version of Excel, I look at it and start using it and then think, I don't like this, I prefer the one I'm using. So I apologize for being completely out of date. There you go. Right. Okay, now what if I then say to myself, well, what shall I do with this? Do I really want to fiddle with these numbers? Well, maybe I don't, because maybe most of these numbers are actually fine. Maybe what I really want to do is only consider looking at figures like these, which are these sorts of areas. In other words, the ones up in the air with higher rev values and higher pressing down on the pedal values. So maybe if I want to have my +2, maybe I should be over here. Or maybe I shouldn't have +2. Maybe I should consider having a 10% increase. And what would that do? If I put in there equals, and then I go across to that one and say, okay, well obviously it now equals 0 because that's what that one says. So if I go up here now and I say, right, I'd like that one multiplied by 1.1, which is 10%, enter. Well, of course, 0 multiplied by 1.1 is still 0. And if I drag that down to here, it is still 0. And if I drag this whole block across, with a bit of luck and a bit of magic, I'll get new values. So here I've got new values 10% bigger than the original values. Now, whether I should change values down here or only change values over here is a moot point, and this is where you can decide for yourself. Many people would say don't change values down here, only change them at the top end. But I find advice like that is pointless, because if you're changing your car, you are going to be the one driving it, so you should be the one to decide if you want slight changes across the map or all at one point. Now, as before, there's going to be some that we don't want that increase on, because I'm advising anybody not to go above the original value at the moment. So I'm just going to drag that one to there so that it will stay at 70, and then I'm going to just drag that one down here so it will stay at the original values. So these I've kept at the original values at the moment. So there's my 10% increase across the board, and when I get to there I've still got a 10% increase, but when I get to here I haven't got a 10% increase because I've just seen it gives me 70 point something. So instead I'm just going to put 70. And here, what happens with my 10% increase? Oh, cancel. That was my fault. I'm just grabbing the wrong corner. You see that's gone a little bit too high again, so I'm going to say, okay, I'll accept that one as 70, or I could just say I'll accept it as a copy of that one. Oh, there we go. Hold on, I'm just going to drag that down so they all... Oh, that's gone back to the original value, which I didn't want, didn't I? So I'm sorry about that. I'll leave that at 70. That's 70. I should have left it like it was in the first place, shouldn't I? So okay, so what I've now got then is I've got a value there. Well, let's start there. I've got a value there which hasn't changed, and I've got a value there that hasn't changed, and I've got a value there which is 10% higher and one there that hasn't changed. I've got a value there that's 10% higher and one that hasn't changed. 10% higher, no change. 10% higher, no change. 10% higher, 10% higher, 10% higher, 10% higher. So without me doing any work at all really, apart from moving numbers around in front of your eyes, I have got an apparent set of numbers for a remap. Now this is where you can decide what to do, because what you could do now is you could copy, let's say, just this little block here. So those three columns, you could copy these into there, but do it in Winols obviously, and then you could load that into your car, your ECU, and then you could try driving the car and see if you notice any difference. And then having done that, you could always come back and then again just do the whole block this time. So we've actually gone further than some remappers would tell us to. Instead of doing this little block at this end, we could do the whole block, and then we could put that in and then go and drive the car and see how the car feels. We are not going to do any damage as long as we stick to sensible figures, so we're small changes. And if you go and drive the car, it won't have any more performance, but it might feel different because you're only changing the driver's request or the driver's wish. You're not changing fueling, so performance can't have changed. So if you come back thinking, wow, that actually feels better performance, you know how to fool yourself. So you could try that little block, couldn't you, and see how it feels, and then you could try the whole block and see how it feels. And if for you it feels better as a whole block change, a sort of smoother transition, then you could say, well, actually I'll leave it like that, I'll have that whole block change. If you feel that you would prefer to just have that little change, then you could just have that little change. You could decide which way you want to change that map. So that would be entirely up to you. The only thing you're concerned with at this stage is whether you've made things worse. That's all you're concerned with. If you go for a drive and come back and you think that's actually worse than when I started, then that's no good, is it? But if you change something and it makes no difference at all, or it's better, then you're probably okay. Obviously what you're looking for every time you make a change is a fractional improvement, because what you should be doing if you do any remapping is make very small changes and then test, and then very small changes and then test. If you start making large changes, you may break something before you get a reasonable test. So don't jump in with both feet and end up with your head below the level of the water. Think it through carefully, make little changes, and then go from there. Right, I'm going to stop there because I want to have a look at the next map on another video, because otherwise these are going to get way too long.